Hello, welcome back to Homeschool Wherever. My name is Carmen Sognonvi, and in today's video, I'm going to give a recap of how our very first month of homeschool ever went. If you're new to this channel, we are a multiracial secular family living in New York City, and we're homeschooling for the first time this year. We have two daughters, Sean, who's in 6th grade, and Ella, who's in 3rd grade. We're also passionate about using travel to bring our homeschool lessons to life. This channel is all about documenting our homeschooling journey, so if that sounds of interest to you, please subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next video. We're also full-time family travel creators, so if you want to see that side of our lives, check out our travel channel at Top Flight Family. So since this is the first year that we're starting to homeschool, September was also our very first month ever of homeschool. And overall, it was a really productive and successful month. One of the highlights of the month was definitely our unit that we did about the Mayan civilization. And then after studying the Mayan civilization, we were actually able to travel to Chichen Itza to see this ancient Mayan city and really bring that homeschool lesson to life. So the way this all happened is originally I was planning to start our history curriculum, which we had chosen a US history curriculum called Oh Freedom. And it is a secular curriculum that takes kind of a decolonized, less Eurocentric view of American history. But when I found out that we were actually going to be doing a trip to Cancun at the end of September to work with a fantastic resort over there, and I found out that Chichen Itza would be opening that week after having been closed all this time because of COVID, I thought, wow, let's shift gears a little bit. And instead of starting the US history curriculum, let's do a unit about the Mayan civilization. So that unit was fantastic. And then getting to actually visit Chichen Itza and see the pyramids, the temples, the ball courts, and getting such in-depth knowledge about Chichen Itza from our guide, who is not only an archaeologist enthusiast, but also his father is Mayan, so he also has a very personal connection to the topic. That was just priceless. So if you want to learn all about what that experience was like, I'm going to link below to the video that's all about the Chichen Itza tour and everything that we learned about the Mayans on that tour. So in September, we definitely were able to settle into a pretty good routine. And at some point, I'll do a whole video about what that's like. But essentially, we start our mornings in a pretty chill way. We start by doing a little bit of free writing, a little bit of mindfulness, then we move into quiet reading, we do a read aloud, and all of this happens on our couch. Really nice, really cozy. So for us, this has been a great way to really start every single homeschool day. So when we're not self-isolating the way we are right now, because we came back from Mexico, so we want to be safe and responsible, we'll go out to the park so the girls can burn off some energy, get some outdoor time, and then after a little bit of a snack, we'll get into the table portion of our homeschool day, so everything that happens at the dining table. And we usually start with math to kind of knock that out first thing. Then we get into language arts, into history, and then depending on what else we have going on, we could do a little bit of our unit study, we might get into a little bit of art history, and just about every homeschool day will incorporate some type of an art project. So I have a whole vlog about our very first day of homeschool, which I'm going to link down below. The routine that we do on that first day is pretty much what we're still doing now, so you can check that out if you're interested. So let's talk about the curriculum that we've been using and how that's all been going. I actually have a whole video about the curriculum that we chose and why we chose each thing, so if you haven't seen it, I'm going to link that down below. And let's start with talking about language arts. So we decided to go with the Brave Writer program, which is Julie Bogart's curriculum, and we're doing both the DART and the partnership writing. So DART is sort of more of the mechanics of language, so spelling, punctuation, grammar, things like that. And partnership writing is, of course, more writing based. So I have to say with DART, we didn't get very far. We only got into week 1 of the first month of the curriculum. And basically that first month is focusing on Charlotte's Web and using that as the text to teach different lessons around spelling and punctuation. And the reason that we didn't get very far is because even within a single week, it covers a ton of stuff. So in addition to like spelling and vocabulary words, there's a whole section on punctuation, and they basically cover every single punctuation mark that exists. So I think that with this curriculum, I have to still kind of feel it out a little bit, and I'm not getting a good grasp on the pacing, I guess, because that seems like a whole lot of stuff to cover in a single week. For us, we're only doing language arts 3 days a week, so I haven't quite figured out exactly how to break up each week into 3 lessons. So I think that's something I have to figure out just from a pacing perspective, but if any of you guys are using DART from the Brave Writer curriculum and you have any tips, I would love to hear. So on the partnership writing side, we really enjoyed that first unit. We got 3 out of the 4 weeks done, and that first month is all about codes and code breaking. And so it's a really fun kind of introduction into writing, specifically talking about how to write secret messages in code, how to decode messages. And it ended up actually tying in very nicely with our unit on the Mayans, since a big part of the research around Mayan culture has been trying to decipher the hieroglyphs that the Mayans used in their written language. So it's funny to see already in month one, you know, how we're kind of tying these different topics together. So for math, we've been using Beast Academy. And so far, we're really liking the curriculum. The guidebook is written as a graphic novel, and both my girls absolutely love graphic novels, so I think that format really appeals to them. And even though it is sort of like a fun curriculum, it's definitely very rigorous, and the way that it teaches the mathematical principles, I think it's done in a really good way. So one issue that we've run into with Beast Academy is some of the actual problems in the workbook. So when I first bought the curriculum, since we're starting with level 2A, I think in my mind, I assumed that this was sort of equivalent to like maybe second grade math. And even though Ella's in third grade and obviously Sean is in sixth grade, I purposely wanted to kind of like go back a little bit to make sure that we have a firm foundation before moving forward. But when we started going through the problems, I realized, oh no, this is not second grade math at all. In fact, Beast Academy, which I later found out, is actually known for being a great option for kids who are quite advanced at math. And the way the workbook progresses, it's sort of like the first few pages are covering kind of the basic mechanics of the lesson that has been taught. And then the later pages get into some more tricky questions that are not necessarily going to be at like a second grade level. And it kind of felt like we were running into some issues because Ella was kind of progressing a bit slowly with the worksheets. She was feeling a little frustrated. And then there were some problems that were absolutely within her ability. And then all of a sudden there would be this other problem there where, you know, for example, she would have to carry the one multiple times. And I'm kind of like, oh, at what point did we cover that? So at one point in the month, I was like, maybe we should just scrap Beast Academy and try to find a math curriculum that's a little bit more about covering the basics in a very systematic way. But then I started thinking, wait, why am I so hung up on her having to finish every single page in the workbook? Because ultimately, to me, the guidebook is laying out certain mathematical principles and concepts, and as long as she's grasping those concepts, then the work is done. Even if she doesn't finish every single problem on every single page of the book, as long as she understands, for example, ones, tens, and hundreds, and those placements, then we got out of it what we needed to. So that was one of those realizations where I was like, as much as I think that over the summer I managed to de-school as much as the kids, it's actually not true, because clearly I'm still very much stuck in that traditional school mindset where it's like, oh, we have to follow the path. If it says we have to do 10 pages, then we have to finish 10 pages before we can move on to the next thing. So that was a good realization for me. And so I realized that instead of trying to scrap one curriculum and trying to find another one, I'm simply going to do a better job of adapting this curriculum for the different needs of my two kids. So as I outlined in my video about curriculum choices, for science, we had decided to go with a curriculum called Supercharged Science. And I had been really excited about it because it's designed by a woman who herself is a scientist, so I feel like that's a great role model for the kids to have. Also, the lessons are very heavily video-based, which really works for our learning style. However, as we started digging around the site and trying to figure out which lesson to teach and which experiments to try, I realized that it just wasn't for us. So we actually decided to just cancel our subscription, and we're no longer using Supercharged Science. One is it's not very user-friendly in terms of the way that the site is laid out. It's kind of difficult to decide or to find kind of a logical way to go about the lessons. But more importantly, the video quality is awful. I mean, we're living in a 4K world now, and I don't expect every single type of video out there to be 4K, but at the very least, it should be like 1080. And a lot of these videos, you can tell, were made quite a few years ago. They're at like 720 or lower resolution. It's just kind of hard to see what's going on. And, you know, to be honest, Serge and I are both not super like STEM oriented. So I think for us to be able to teach STEM, we need things to be laid out in a very clear and, you know, frankly, a much more attractive way, so that it's going to be much more appealing to us as teachers, not just to the kids as well. So we decided to scrap that, and instead Serge, who is in charge of science, has been spending September just doing a few like random experiments that he's found online. But I recently found another great resource, which I'm excited to try in October. So I'm not going to tell you too much about that yet, but in my October recap, I'll let you know how that goes. So those were sort of the main cornerstones of our curriculum. So now I'll talk about some of the supplemental materials I had picked up and how those have been been going. I also made a separate video about each of these resources, so I'm gonna again link that down below if you wanna check that out. But the first sort of supplemental resource that we found is Philosophy for Kids. And so we started doing this book really only in the last couple of days, and it's been going really, really well so far. So the book is designed to introduce kids to some of the major philosophers throughout history and some of their core ideas. And it does this in a very engaging way. So each chapter essentially poses sort of a situation and then asks the kid what they would do in that situation. And it's very clear that this is not math where there's an actual correct answer and you can flip to the back of the book and look at the answer key. Philosophy is really about figuring out your own answer to these very difficult sometimes questions. And it ties each of these situations back to one philosopher and summarizes a little bit of his ideas around that topic. So the first two lessons I did with just Sean, my older one, because that day Ella actually wasn't feeling that well, so we let her sleep in a little bit. So the first chapter introduced Plato and some of his ideas around justice. The second chapter introduced Aristotle and some of his ideas around friendship. And I really loved the way the book made the lessons so relatable. So for example, the Aristotle and friendship case, it really asked kids to think about what is the meaning of friendship. If you have this type of a relationship with someone, do you consider that a friendship? If you have that type of relationship, do you consider that a friendship? So yeah, I think that was done really well. And then we did a third chapter with both girls, and that one related to Marcus Aurelius and Stoicism. And again, the way the book made it relatable for kids is they phrased it in terms of, do you let the little things bother you? So for example, if you're studying in a room and it's a little bit too hot or too cold, is that going to get in the way of your studying? So yeah, so far that's been going really well. The girls have been enjoying kind of getting into these discussions and pondering these different situations. So I highly recommend this resource if you're interested in exploring some of these philosophers with your kids. Handwriting has been going fine. I had ordered 2 books from Handwriting Without Tears. One is Printing Power, which is the one that Ella's using. And then I also got Cursive Kickoff for Sean. So Sean complained a little bit that Cursive Kickoff was like too easy for her because before she had just on her own, I think, found like a cursive book and she had already practiced. So Cursive Kickoff is sort of, it starts with printing and then it gets slowly into cursive. So she felt like she was a little more advanced than that. So she finished the book already in less than a month. So instead of getting the next book up for her, I actually skipped a level up and got the following book from Handwriting Without Tears. So hopefully she's gonna like that one better, but I will report about that in the October recap. Geography has been going fine. This is something that the girls work on their days with Serge, not with me. So we've been working through this Rand McNally workbook that has sort of a beginner and an intermediate level. So we're starting with the beginner. And the girls have been kind of working at their own pace. Sean is quite a bit further ahead than Ella. And overall, I think it's a really good introduction to countries, mountains, rivers, all of that good stuff. Discovering great artists. This has been something that we haven't used too much of yet, but what we have done, we've really enjoyed. So the very first lesson in this book is about the Italian artist who kind of kicked off the Renaissance, and his name is Giotto. So it explains a little bit about his work and kind of explains why his work was important. And then it has a great activity where you actually emulate the way that artists would make paint back in those days. So they would often make paint by mixing in egg yolks or egg whites. So the project that we did, we smashed up a bunch of chalk, we mixed it in with egg to make our own paints, and then brushed it onto the paper. And as you'll see, the paint is a little bit more sheer, it's got a little bit of texture depending on how finely or not you crush the chalk. And that was a really fun kind of process art project, I thought. Now, the thing I will say about this book is that they don't go into a whole lot of detail about each artist. And also because it's in black and white and the examples of the art are very, very tiny, it really doesn't do any justice to each artist. So if you are serious about sort of the art history aspect of this book and not in it just for the art projects, which absolutely you could just use it just for the art projects and not worry even about the history. But if you do want to do a little bit of the art history side, I would highly recommend kind of supplementing this book by looking up YouTube videos about artists, also just Googling images of their artwork so you can actually see it bigger and in color. So for us, we actually found a couple of YouTube documentaries that were either about Giotto or about that period and kind of placed him in context that were really helpful. And then also Googling images of some of his greatest artworks really helped bring that lesson to life, especially when we compared it to the type of art that came before him, where everything looked really flat and there was no facial expressions. And Giotto really brought a much greater sense of like physical depth and space, as well as emotions in facial expressions. I think that brought the lesson to life a lot more. So the last supplemental resource I had ordered was Meet the Great Composers, which is sort of the music history version of the Discover Great Artists book. And this we honestly haven't cracked open at all. So hopefully we'll be able to get to that in October and I'll have something to report then. So besides doing the unit on Mayans and then also just working our way through the curriculum as I've just described, the other big thing we worked on in September was doing a unit study about the disco era. And this was a lot of fun for us. It's the first time I put together a unit study. It's a little bit of an unconventional topic. And overall, I think it was pretty successful. I think the girls enjoyed it. We all learned a lot. And if you want all the details about that unit study, why I came up with that topic, how we went about studying it, I'm going to link that video down below. So let's talk about some of the lessons learned for me in September. And the first thing is something that I kind of caught glimpses of when we were doing public school virtually back in March through June. And that is how important managing emotions is when it comes to learning. So like a lot of kids, my kids found the virtual school pretty frustrating. And so every day I felt like my primary job then was to manage their emotional well-being so that they would be sort of balanced enough to be able to actually do the work. Luckily, now that we're fully homeschooling, the work hasn't really been as frustrating as it was when we were doing virtual school. But you know, certainly we still have those moments. And I'm realizing now that the emotion part and the connection part is really sort of the base and the foundation of a good homeschool. So rather than rushing to cram as much curriculum as possible in each of our days, I'm trying to focus more on making it fun, making things enjoyable, making sure that we're enjoying each other's company while we're doing all of this homeschooling. And I think that ultimately creating that foundation is going to be really important in developing that love of learning. Another lesson I've learned is that we don't have to finish everything. And this is something I particularly realized as we were working through Beast Academy, our math curriculum. I realized I'm still very stuck in that mindset of, no, if the book says you have to do 10 pages of problems, we have to do 10 pages of problems before we can move on to the next thing. And so I'm trying to slowly kind of deprogram myself from that and realize that it's really about getting out of this what we want to get out of it, as opposed to finishing every single problem. So related to that is lesson 3 for me, which is that I need to still de-school more. Now, if you're not sure what deschooling is, I have a whole video that explains exactly what that is. I'm going to link that down below for you. But essentially, deschooling is the transition from a traditional school to a homeschool and giving yourself that time to be able to rid yourself of some of those preconceived notions and things that you're used to and convention from traditional school, because a lot of those don't necessarily translate very well to a homeschool. So we had taken 2 entire months off, and I thought that we were pretty well deschooled, and I think my girls are for the most part, but I realized that no, I myself need a lot of work in this area still. So I think that was another big lesson for me in September. Another thing I realized is more is not better. Ultimately, it's much more beneficial to be able to do 1 page of problems and do them well and in a way that's emotionally balanced, where you're not feeling upset and crying through the whole thing. I would much rather have my girls do 1 page of problems really well than try to cram 5 pages in and have to fight with them about it and have them feeling really frustrated and angry about it. Ultimately, when you're in that negative state of mind, you're not really in a condition to absorb any learning. And another lesson I realized is that we need to include more art in everything. Both of my girls absolutely love making art. They really think of themselves as artists. They both kind of want to be artists in one form or another when they grow up. And we've already done a pretty good job with that in September because, for example, anytime I do a read aloud, they are working on something creative, whether it's like sketching or coloring in a coloring book or working on an art project. We also work on art projects while we're watching documentaries, because I find that if you try to get a kid to just sit still and watch quietly, they're gonna be very fidgety. They're not really going to be focused. But if they have something to do with their hands while they're watching it, they actually absorb the information much better. So the lesson for me is I need to keep going with that and to incorporate a little bit of art into every single homeschool day that we do. Okay, if you want to learn about the very first unit study we did, which was all about the disco era, just click there. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. And be sure to follow us on TikTok and Instagram at Homeschool Wherever. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.